The gray waters of the English Channel churned beneath Lieutenant Colonel James Earl Rudder's landing craft as the first light of June 6, 1944, broke across the horizon. The young Texan officer gripped his rifle tighter, knowing that in mere hours he would lead the 2nd Ranger Battalion up the treacherous cliffs of Point du Hoc. Around him, hundreds of vessels cut through the choppy seas, their hulls packed with the hopes and fears of an entire generation. Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight David Eisenhower had made the fateful decision. Just 24 hours earlier, weather conditions had been deteriorating for days, forcing a postponement for June 5th. But meteorologists promised a brief window of opportunity, and Eisenhower seized it with characteristic resolve. "Okay, we'll go," he had declared, setting in motion the largest seaborne invasion in human history. Across the Channel, German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel slept fitfully in his home in Herrlingen, unaware that 156,000 Allied troops were bearing down on the Atlantic Wall. He had spent months fortifying. The Desert Fox had been convinced that the invasion would come at the Pas de Calais, where the channel was narrowest. His absence from Normandy on this crucial morning would prove catastrophic for the German defense. As referenced in Stephen Ambrose's comprehensive work D-Day, June 6, 1944, the pre-dawn hours were filled with the drone of Allied aircraft. More than 13,000 paratroopers from the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions had already begun dropping behind enemy lines, their mission to secure vital bridges and crossroads before the seaborne assault commenced. Private First Class John Steele of the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment found himself dangling from the church steeple in St. Mère-Église, his parachute snagged on the stone tower. Below him, German soldiers rushed through the streets, their shouts piercing the night air. Steele would hang there for hours, playing dead while watching the battle unfold beneath his boots. The Atlantic Wall stretched along the French coast like a concrete serpent, bristling with artillery pieces, machine gun nests, and obstacles designed to turn the beaches into killing fields. German General Friedrich Dahlmann commanded the 7th Army, responsible for defending this sector of Fortress Europe. His troops, a mixture of seasoned veterans and foreign conscripts, manned positions that had taken years to construct. At Omaha Beach, the first wave of American assault troops prepared for what would become the bloodiest confrontation of the day. The 29th Infantry Division and elements of the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, would face the strongest German defenses. Colonel George Taylor would later utter the words that epitomized the American spirit that morning. "Two kinds of people are staying on this beach, those who are dead and those who are going to die. Now let's get the hell out of here." The naval bombardment began at 5:50 in the morning, as Allied warships unleashed a thunderous barrage against German coastal positions. The battleship USS Texas, commanded by Captain Charles Baker, sent 14-inch shells screaming toward the bluffs overlooking the landing zones. Yet even this massive firepower would prove insufficient to silence all enemy positions. As dawn broke fully across the Norman coast, the greatest gamble in military history was about to begin. The ramps of the landing craft dropped with metallic crashes that were immediately drowned by the staccato of German machine gun fire. At 0-6-30 hours on June 6, 1944, American soldiers of the 1st Infantry Division's 16th Regiment stumbled into the surf at Omaha Beach, only to be met by a withering hail of bullets from the heights above. Captain Leonard Schroeder of Fox Company watched in horror as his men fell like wheat before a scythe. The pre-invasion bombardment had failed to destroy the German positions, and now Oberst Karl May's 352nd Infantry Division was exacting a terrible price from the Americans struggling through the shallow water. Bodies floated in the crimson foam as soldiers sought whatever cover they could find behind the steel beach obstacles that Rommel had ordered placed months earlier. At Utah Beach, fortune smiled more kindly upon the 4th Infantry Division. Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr., son of the former president, had insisted on landing with the first wave despite his age and failing health. Where the landing craft deposited his men nearly 2 miles south of their intended target, Roosevelt made a decision that would save countless lives. "We'll start the war from right here." His calm leadership under fire earned him the Medal of Honor, though he would not live to receive it. German resistance varied dramatically along the 50-mile front. At Juno Beach, Canadian forces of the 3rd Infantry Division fought house-to-house battles in the coastal towns, while German snipers picked off unwary soldiers from church towers and fortified positions. Major General Rod Keller's Canadians pushed inland faster than any other Allied force that day, their momentum carrying them to within sight of the crucial city of Caen. The British 2nd Army, under Lieutenant General Sir Miles Dempsey, faced determined resistance at Gold and Sword Beaches. The 50th Infantry Division, veterans of North Africa and Sicily, methodically cleared German strong points while Royal Engineers worked frantically to clear paths through the minefields. At Sword Beach, Brigadier Lord Lovat's 4th Special Service Brigade, complete with Bagpaper Bill Millen playing Highland airs amid the gunfire, linked up with the airborne forces holding the vital Pegasus Bridge. Back at Omaha, the situation had become desperate. General Omar Bradley, commanding the 1st Army from the cruiser USS Augusta, seriously considered evacuating the beach. Bodies carpeted the sand, and the survivors huddled behind a low seawall, pinned down by fire from the bluffs. It was then that individual acts of heroism began to turn the tide. Staff Sergeant Frank Perigori of the 116th Infantry Regiment charged a German machine gun nest single-handedly, clearing the way for his company to advance up the deadly draws. The German response was hampered by confusion and poor communication. General Gunther Blumentritt, Chief of Staff to Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, struggled to coordinate a coherent defense as reports flooded in from multiple landing sites. By noon, small groups of Americans had finally fought their way off Omaha Beach, were climbing the bluffs. Colonel Charles Kenholm of the 116th Infantry Regiment, his hand shattered by shrapnel, continued to lead his men forward with his good arm. "They're murdering us here," he shouted to a hesitant soldier. "Let's move inland and get murdered there." The German defense began to crumble as ammunition ran low and Allied naval gunfire found its targets. Destroyer USS McCook, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Ralph Ramey, close to within 800 yards of the beach to provide direct fire support, its 5-inch guns systematically destroying enemy positions. The courage of the American sailors matched that of the soldiers struggling ashore. As the sun reached its zenith over Normandy, the outcome remained in doubt, but the foothold had been established. Behind the enemy lines, the paratroopers of the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions fought a different kind of battle, scattered across the Norman countryside by high winds and German anti-aircraft fire. These elite soldiers found themselves fighting in small groups, often far from their intended drop zones. Major General Matthew Ridgway's 82nd Airborne had the mission of securing the vital crossroads town of St. Mary-Église and preventing German reinforcements from reaching the beaches. Lieutenant Colonel Edward Cross led the 3rd Battalion of the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment in a fierce night battle for the town square of St. Mary-Église. German soldiers from the 919th Grenadier Regiment had fortified the stone buildings, turning each structure into a miniature fortress. The crack of rifle fire echoed off the ancient walls as American paratroopers moved from house to house, clearing rooms with grenades and bayonets. Private First Class Charles Degloper of the 3rd Battalion, 525th Parachute Infantry Regiment, found himself cut off from his unit near the Lafayette Causeway when German machine guns opened fire on his advancing comrades. Degloper deliberately exposed himself to draw enemy fire, continuing to shoot until he was mortally wounded. His sacrifice allowed his fellow paratroopers to capture the vital bridge, earning him a posthumous Medal of Honor. The 101st Airborne Division, commanded by Major General Maxwell Taylor, faced an equally daunting task. Their mission involved securing the southern flank of the invasion area and capturing the locks at La Barquette to prevent the Germans from flooding the low-lying areas. Behind Utah Beach, Colonel Howard Johnson's 3rd Battalion of the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment fought a running battle through the hedgerow country, where every field became a potential killing ground. German reaction to the airborne assault was swift, but uncoordinated. Major Friedrich August Freiherr von der Heyd's 6th Parachute Regiment, ironically Germany's own elite airborne force now fighting as infantry, rushed to contain the American paratroopers. The veteran German soldiers knew the terrain intimately, but they lacked the numbers to be everywhere at once. As dawn approached, small groups of paratroopers began to coalesce into larger fighting formations. The distinctive cricket noisemakers issued to American troops helped scattered soldiers identify friendly forces in the darkness. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Cole of the 3rd Battalion, 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment, gathered nearly 400 men from various units and launched a coordinated attack on German positions near Saint-Marie-du-Mont. The hedgerow country of Normandy, called bocage by the French, presented unique challenges to both sides. Ancient earthen banks topped with thick hedges divided the landscape into countless small fields, each invisible from the next. German defenders could concentrate their fire on the narrow gaps between fields, while American attackers found it nearly impossible to coordinate large unit movements. Captain Richard Winters of Easy Company, 2nd Battalion, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment led one of the most successful small unit actions of the day. With just 13 men, Winners attacked and destroyed a German artillery battery that had been firing on Utah Beach. The action, later immortalized in historical accounts, demonstrated the initiative and tactical skill that made American paratroopers so effective. By mid-morning of June 6th, the scattered airborne units had accomplished much of their mission despite the chaos of the night. Key bridges remained in Allied hands, crossroads were blocked to German reinforcements, and the exits from Utah Beach were secure. The price had been heavy, nearly 2,500 airborne casualties in the first day, but the strategic objectives were largely achieved. General Omar Bradley would later write that the airborne operations were the key that unlocked the door to Hitler's Fortress Europe. Without the paratroopers holding the vital ground behind the beaches, the seaborne assault might have faced insurmountable obstacles. The sun was now fully up, and the sounds of battle from the beaches carried inland on the Normandy breeze. The vertical cliffs of Point du Hoc rose 90 feet above the churning surf, their chalk faces scarred by Allied bombing but still bristling with German defensive positions. Lieutenant Colonel James Earl Rudder's 2nd Ranger Battalion approached the seemingly impregnable position at 7:10 in the morning, 30 minutes behind schedule due to navigation errors that had taken them to far east along the Norman coast. The mission was critical. Intelligence reports indicated that 6 155mm guns were positioned at Point du Hoc, capable of devastating both Omaha and Utah beaches. These weapons had to be silenced before the main assault waves arrived. As the landing craft approached the base of the cliffs, German soldiers appeared at the rim above, hurling grenades down at the Rangers while machine gun fire raked the narrow beach. Sergeant Leonard Lomell of Dog Company fired one of the first rocket-propelled grappling hooks up the cliff face. The specially designed ropes, provided by the London Fire Brigade, carried scaling ladders and rope nets up the vertical rock. German defenders immediately began cutting the ropes, but the Rangers had anticipated this, waiting their lines to make them harder to sever. Within minutes, the 1st Rangers were climbing toward almost certain death. Private First Class Carl Weiss of Fox Company was among the first to reach the top of the cliff. What he found surprised him. The elaborate concrete bunkers were empty of the massive artillery pieces they were supposed to contain. Wooden decoys had been positioned to fool Allied reconnaissance aircraft, while the real guns had been moved inland. The Rangers had scaled the cliffs under murderous fire to capture an empty position. But Rudder's men were not finished. Sergeant Lomell and Staff Sergeant Jack Kuhn set off inland to locate the missing guns. Moving through the hedgerow country south of Point du Hoc, they discovered the artillery pieces hidden in an orchard, camouflaged, but ready for action. Using thermite grenades, the 2 Rangers destroyed the guns' elevation and traversal mechanisms, rendering them useless. German forces from the 914th Grenadier Regiment, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Rudolf Bacher, surrounded the American position and launched repeated counterattacks. The Rangers, cut off from reinforcement and running low on ammunition, held their precarious foothold through sheer determination. Captain Ralph Goranson of Charlie Company organized the defense of the western sector of the Ranger position. His men converted German bunkers into strong points, turning the enemy's own fortifications against them. When German infantry attempted to infiltrate the position during the night of June 6th, Goranson's Rangers met them with rifle fire and hand grenades in brutal close-quarters combat. The situation became increasingly desperate as German artillery found the range to the Ranger positions. Major Cleveland Laddell, Rudder's executive officer, was severely wounded when a shell burst near the command post. Communications with the beach were sporadic, and ammunition was running critically low. By the morning of June 7th, the Rangers had suffered 50% casualties, but continued to hold their position. Relief finally came on the morning of June 8th when elements of the 5th Ranger Battalion, supported by the 2nd Battalion of the 116th Infantry Regiment, fought their way through German positions to reach Point du Hoc. The link-up was emotional. The survivors of Rudder's original force numbered only 42 men still capable of fighting, out of the 225 who had made the assault. The capture of Point du Hoc became one of the most celebrated actions of D-Day, though its strategic importance was debated after the war. The guns that posed such a threat to the invasion beaches had been moved, but the Rangers' heroic assault demonstrated American determination and tactical skill. More importantly, it tied down significant German forces that might otherwise have been used to reinforce the beach defenses. Colonel Rudder, wounded twice during the action but refusing evacuation, would later receive the Distinguished Service Cross for his leadership. The Ranger motto, "Rangers lead the way," was born from the actions at Point du Hoc, where ordinary American soldiers accomplished the extraordinary through courage and teamwork. As the Rangers consolidated their hard-won position, the sounds of battle continued to echo across Normandy. The third week of June 1944 found the Allied armies locked in a deadly stalemate. Among the hedgerows of Normandy, what military planners had hoped would be a rapid breakout had devolved into a grinding battle of attrition reminiscent of the Western Front in World War I. General Omar Bradley's First Army faced determined German resistance as Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, now returned from his brief absence, orchestrated a stubborn defense that utilized every advantage of the Norman terrain. Major General Lawton Collins, commanding the 7th Corps, planned a decisive assault on the strategic crossroads of Saint-Vith. This small Belgian town controlled the network of roads that German forces needed to maintain their defensive positions. The 4th Infantry Division, now veteran troops after their successful landing at Utah Beach, would spearhead the attack supported by elements of the newly arrived 9th Infantry Division. Colonel Russell Reeder's 12th Infantry Regiment moved out at dawn on June 20th. Their advance preceded by a thunderous artillery barrage from the guns of the 42nd Field Artillery Battalion. The German defenders, primarily from the 243rd Infantry Division under General Major Heinz Helmich, had spent weeks preparing their positions. Among the ancient stone buildings of Saint-Vith's medieval core, the fighting that followed epitomized the brutal nature of urban warfare. Staff Sergeant Curtis Cullen of the 2nd Armored Division had recently invented a device that would revolutionize the bocage fighting. Steel teeth cut from German beach obstacles and welded to the front of Sherman tanks, allowing them to burst through hedgerows instead of climbing over them. These rhinoceros tanks now supported the infantry advance through Saint-Vith's narrow streets. Captain John Ahern of Company E, 12th Infantry Regiment, led his men in a house-to-house battle through the commercial district. German Panzerfaust, portable anti-tank weapons, turned every intersection into a death trap for supporting armor. When Ahern's company became pinned down by machine gun fire from the town's Gothic church tower, Private First Class Vernon McGarity volunteered to assault the position single-handedly. His one-man attack cleared the strongpoint, but cost him his life, earning a posthumous Medal of Honor. The German defense was handicapped by fuel shortages and lack of air support. General der Panzertruppen Heinrich Eberbach's 5th Panzer Army could not concentrate sufficient forces to mount effective counterattacks. The Luftwaffe, once the terror of European skies, could manage only sporadic sorties against the advancing Americans. Allied air superiority was complete. P-47 Thunderbolts of the 56th Fighter Group provided close air support, their pilots coordinating with ground controllers through newly developed radio procedures. By June 22nd, American forces had penetrated the German defensive ring around Saint-Vith. Lieutenant Colonel William Westmoreland, commanding the 34th Field Artillery Battalion, coordinated fire support for the final assault on the town center. His guns, firing from concealed positions in nearby woods, systematically reduced German strongpoints while minimizing damage to civilian structures. The breakthrough came when Company F of the 12th Infantry Regiment, led by Captain Robert Murphy, discovered an undefended sewer tunnel that led directly under the German positions. 20 volunteers followed Murphy through the underground passage, emerging behind enemy lines to create chaos in the German rear areas. This unexpected assault collapsed the final German resistance in Saint-Vith. General Collins personally entered Saint-Vith on June 23rd, riding in the lead tank of Combat Command A, 4th Armored Division. The capture of this strategic town opened the road network to German forces retreating toward the Siegfried Line. More importantly, it demonstrated that American forces had adapted to the unique challenges of Norman warfare and were ready to exploit future opportunities. The cost had been significant. The 12th Infantry Regiment suffered over 300 casualties in 3 days of fighting, but the tactical lessons learned at Saint-Vith would prove invaluable in the coming operations. American soldiers had mastered the art of combined arms warfare, coordinating infantry, armor, artillery, and air support with increasing effectiveness. As Allied forces consolidated their hold on Saint-Vith, German commanders recognized that the strategic initiative had shifted decisively to the invaders. The ancient city of Caen, with its towering cathedral and medieval walls, had become the anvil upon which the fate of Normandy would be decided. Field Marshal Bernard Law Montgomery's 21st Army Group had made the capture of this strategic communication center their primary objective. By late June 1944, what should have been a swift advance had become a bloody siege that would test the resolve of both sides. Lieutenant General Sir Richard O'Connor S. 8th Corps prepared for Operation Epsom, a massive assault designed to outflank Conn from the west. The 15th Scottish Division, commanded by Major General Gordon Macmillan, would lead the attack across the Odon River, while the 11th Armored Division, under Major General George Roberts, would exploit any breakthrough toward the crucial Hill 117. Meyer established his headquarters in the Ardennes Abbey, just outside Caen, and prepared to make the Canadians and British pay dearly for every yard of Norman soil. The attack began at 7:30 on the morning of June 26th, with a devastating artillery bombardment from over 700 guns. The Royal Artillery's 25th Army Group coordinated the largest concentration of firepower yet assembled in the European theater, but as the Scottish infantry advanced across the rolling countryside west of Caen, they discovered that German positions had survived the bombardment largely intact. Sergeant Major John Mackenzie of the 6th Battalion, Royal Scots Fusiliers, led his company in an assault on the village of Show. Mackenzie's citation for the Victoria Cross would later describe how he personally eliminated 3 machine gun nests while rallying his men under intense fire. The German response was swift and brutal. SS Standard Tempur Max, Wunsch's 1st SS Panzer Regiment, launched a counterattack with Tiger tanks that caught British armor in open ground. The Panzer IV Mark tanks of the Staffordshire Yeomanry were outgunned and outarmored, but their crews fought with desperate courage. Lieutenant George Harris's tank crew continued firing even after their Sherman had been immobilized, knocking out 2 German panzers before being overwhelmed. Royal Air Force Typhoon fighter bombers of No. 83 Group provided crucial air support, their rockets proving devastatingly effective against German armor. Wing Commander Charles Green led repeated attacks on German positions despite intense flak, his squadron destroying 12 tanks and numerous vehicles in a single day. But the cost was high. The Light Air Forces lost 43 aircraft on June 26th alone. The battle raged for 6 days as British and Canadian forces slowly ground their way toward the Odon River crossing. The village of Villers-Bocage became synonymous with armored warfare at its most brutal, when SS Hauptsturmführer Michael Whitman's Tiger tank single-handedly destroyed an entire column of British armor, including 14 tanks and 15 other vehicles, in a 15-minute engagement that became legendary. Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Jolly of the 1st Battalion, Tyneside Scottish, found himself surrounded in the village of Gavres with only 60 men remaining from his original force of 600. For 36 hours, these survivors held their position against repeated German attacks, supported only by artillery fire directed from across the Odon River. When relief finally arrived, Jolly's heroic defense had prevented German forces from cutting the British supply lines. By July 2nd, Operation Epsom had ground to a halt short of its objectives. Caen remained in German hands, and the Allied advance had been measured in yards rather than miles. But the strategic situation had shifted in favor of the Allies. German reserves, including the elite 1st SS Panzer Corps, had been drawn into the Caen sector and were now tied down in defensive battles rather than preparing for offensive operations. The lesson of Caen was clear. German resistance remained formidable, but their strategic reserves were being steadily depleted in defensive battles. They could not afford to lose. Montgomery's strategy of attracting German armor to the British sector was working, though at a terrible cost in British and Canadian lives. As July dawned over the Norman countryside, both sides prepared for the decisive battles that would determine the fate of Hitler's fortress. Europe, the hedgerows of Normandy, had become a maze of death where every field was a potential battlefield and every lane a killing ground. By mid-July 1944, American forces under General Omar Bradley faced the reality that their enemy was not just the German army, but the ancient landscape of Norman France itself. The Bocage country, with its centuries-old field divisions marked by earthen banks and thick hedges, provided German defenders with natural fortifications that modern weapons seemed unable to overcome. Major General J. Lawton Collins, commanding the 7th Corps, knew that conventional tactics would not suffice. His staff had calculated that at the current rate of advance, it would take nearly a year to fight through the hedgerow country to reach the German border. Something revolutionary was needed. A breakthrough both tactical and technological that would restore mobility to modern warfare. The answer came from an unlikely source. Sergeant Curtis Cullen Jr. of the 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron. This quiet soldier from New Jersey had been experimenting with steel teeth salvaged from German beach obstacles, welding them to the front of Sherman tanks. These improvised devices, which Cullen called hedgerow cutters, allowed tanks to burst directly through hedge barriers instead of climbing over them, where they became vulnerable to German Panzerfaust. General Bradley immediately ordered every available Sherman tank equipped with Cullen's invention. Within a week, Allied workshops in Normandy were working around the clock to modify hundreds of tanks. The Rhinoceros tanks, as they became known, would spearhead Operation Cobra, a massive breakthrough attempt that would either shatter German resistance or result in catastrophic failure. The assault began at 1100 hours on July 25th, with the most concentrated bombing attack in support of ground forces ever attempted. Over 1,500 heavy bombers of the 8th Air Force dropped nearly 4,000 tons of explosives on German positions in a rectangular area just west of Saint-Lô. The bombing was so intense that the concussion could be felt 20 miles away, and the dust cloud rose 15,000 feet into the Norman sky. Unfortunately, some bombs fell short of their targets, killing over 100 American soldiers, including Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, the highest-ranking American officer to die in the European theater. But the psychological effect on German defenders was devastating. Oberst Fritz Ziegelmann of the 352nd Infantry Division reported that entire companies simply disappeared in the bombardment, their positions obliterated by the rain of high explosives. The ground assault that followed demonstrated American combined arms warfare at its most effective. The 1st Infantry Division's 18th Regiment, now equipped with Rhinoceros tanks, punched through German lines that had held for weeks. Staff Sergeant Sherwood Holman of Company F led his squad through 3 German defensive positions in a single day, personally destroying 2 machine gun nests and capturing 15 prisoners. German resistance cracked like an eggshell under the coordinated assault. General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein's Panzer Lehr Division, considered one of Germany's elite armored formations, suffered 80% casualties in the first day of Operation Cobra. Bayerlein himself reported to his superiors, "My front lines look like the face of the moon, and at least 70% of my troops are out of action, dead, wounded, crazed, or missing." The breakthrough that followed exceeded even Bradley's optimistic projections. By July 28th, American armor was racing across the Norman countryside, advancing further in hours than they had in the previous 6 weeks. Major General John Wood's 4th Armored Division covered 60 miles in 3 days, overrunning German supply depots and headquarters before enemy forces could organize effective resistance. The German 7th Army, commanded by General der Artillerie Erich Marx, found itself in full retreat toward the Seine River. Communications had broken down completely, and individual units were forced to fight their own desperate battles while trying to escape the Allied trap that was rapidly closing around them. The vaunted Atlantic Wall, which had taken years to construct, was breached irreparably in a matter of days. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, commanding the 3rd and 7th Tank Battalion, 4th Armored Division, epitomized the aggressive leadership that characterized the breakthrough. His tanks advanced so rapidly that they often captured German positions before the defenders realized they were under attack. Abrams would later recall, "We were moving so fast that the Germans couldn't adjust their defenses. Every time they tried to establish a new line, we had already gone around them." By August 1st, American forces had advanced over 30 miles from their starting position and were approaching the strategic town of Avranches. The Norman phase of the European campaign was drawing to a close, but the cost had been enormous. American casualties in Normandy totaled over 125,000 men killed, wounded, or missing. German losses were even higher, with 7 complete divisions destroyed and countless others severely mauled. The Battle of Normandy had achieved its strategic objectives. Hitler's fortress Europe lay open to Allied invasion, and the liberation of Western Europe could now proceed. The young Americans who had stormed the beaches on June 6th had proven themselves equal to the greatest military challenge in their nation's history. From the cliffs of Point du Hoc to the hedgerows of the Bocage, they had written a chapter of courage and sacrifice that would inspire future generations. As Allied forces prepared to exploit their hard-won victory, the bells of Norman churches, silent since 1940, began to ring once again, in celebration of freedom regained.